All right, welcome to another episode where I analyze Rich Deem's Where Young Earth Creationism Gets the Bible Wrong. So now we're going to be talking about the Garden of Eden. Here we go.
Let's look more closely at the Garden of Eden. Answers in Genesis and Institute for Creation Research both say that Adam was created as an immortal being.
Well, yes, and that's not just because we assume that that he has an immortal soul. It's because humans, to be considered fully alive, are both physical and spiritual. So to say that Adam, that there was no death before Adam sinned, does indeed imply that Adam would not be able to die physically before his sin.
Dr. Bill Greenshaw from Answers in Genesis wrote, Adam was created immortal. ICR's Aline Orchester says, Adam and Eve were apparently meant to be immortal. If this is true, why did God create the tree of life? And when Adam sinned, why did God protect the tree with cherubim and a flaming sword? The truth is that Adam was created mortal, and if he had eaten from the tree of life, he would have become immortal.
In a physical sense, which would mean that he would not be able to, in essence, die. Which actually, if you're in a sinful state, that's actually a bad thing to happen to you.
Though spiritually dead because of his sin. As late as August 2013...
And again, just to re-emphasize this actually isn't really any particular argument, because the assumption that he's making here, but that he's not stating, I don't know why he's not saying this, is that Adam would have had to continually eat from the tree of life to maintain his immortality, which of course is not told anywhere in the Bible. That is something that he would have had to do. All we know is that after becoming a sinner, God decided that Adam should not eat from the tree of life, and therefore physically put an obstacle to prevent him from being able to reach it. So there you go.
Ken Ham said, ultimately, we don't know where the Garden of Eden was located.
And I'm going to assume that Rich Deem here is going to tell us where the Garden of Eden was located.
Is the Bible really silent on the location of Eden? Why would young earth creationists take this position? The Bible is actually pretty explicit about the location of Eden. Genesis 2 describes the rivers of Eden. The name of the first is Pishon. It grows along the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. The name of the second is Gihon. It flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third is Tigris. It flows east of Assyria. And the fourth is Euphrates. Genesis 2:11 through 14.
And if you actually read the verses, what you see is, okay, let me actually switch the screen over. There we go. Verse 10. A river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters. Now, what is a headwater? That's at the start of a river. It's not where the rivers flow into. It's not. It's where the rivers are coming out of. The name of the first is Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Aromatic resin and onyx was also there. The name of the second is Gihon. It winds through the entire land of Cush. And there's a little footnote, possibly southeast of Mesopotamia. And again, that's conjecture, because Cush is also the name for the region of Sudan and Ethiopia, which of course is a very far away from Mesopotamia. But a lot of people think that Cush actually might refer not to the Cushitic people, but rather to the Kassites. But that, of course, is conjecture. The name of the third river is the Tigris. It runs along the east side of Ashur. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. So what's interesting here is that we're told that these rivers all come out of this river that waters the Garden of Eden. So they're all coming out of that river, which means that what Rich Deem is about to say here is actually going to be opposite of what it actually is.
3 of the 4 rivers exist today, with the 4th being a dry riverbed due to climate change.
And again, if you look at here, these question marks are because nobody actually is familiar with the actual meaning of the names of these rivers as to where their geographical location would be, as opposed to the Tigris and Euphrates, which are known rivers.
That occurred following the end of the last ice age. It is likely that Adam was created during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower because of extensive continental glaciation, and the Persian Gulf region was much more temperate and wetter. This is what the Persian Gulf looked like at the end of the last glacial maximum.
And again, from a young Earth creationist standpoint, there is no such thing as the last glacial maximum, in the sense that the chronology is a bit different, because on a geological level, what shows these things actually occurred a lot more rapidly. However, again, this is the assumption he's making is the opposite of what the text is actually saying. What the text is saying, that the rivers are coming out of this location, not going in to the location. So to say that Eden is beyond the Euphrates and Tigris rather than at its headwaters is actually incorrect. But again, since it mentions Cush, which is of course down here, it would be down here below Egypt on the map. And of course, geographically, that's not really possible to have rivers that come from these areas. The assumption being made by young Earth creationists is that rivers are named after older rivers that existed before the flood. That's the assumption that they're making, as opposed to saying that it has to be this Tigris and Euphrates, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. But there you go.
So Eden was probably just south of the split of the 4 rivers.
And again, it's the headwaters of the 4 rivers, which is, with the 2 known rivers, it would have to be somewhere up here. But because of the fact that the terminology referring to the 4 rivers mentions Cush and a couple of other things, this is also highly unlikely. So the implication would be that there's a different Tigris and a different Euphrates before the flood.
What is now the northern part of the Persian Gulf. The reason why young Earth creationists don't know where Eden was is because of their belief in flood geology.
Yes.
Flood geology says that a massive global flood formed essentially all the current geographical locations that we see today.
And the reason that they assume this is because, number one, they reject the Omphalos hypothesis, which says that God created corpses in the ground, which is weird. And they also reject the old Earth idea, because they believe that the Bible explicitly states that the days of creation are indeed typical days, and that the genealogy does go into the Bronze Age at least, and therefore there's a limit of how much time you can put in to how old the Earth is, which means that the layers that we see in the geologic column, a lot of the sedimentary layers would have to be produced rapidly in order to achieve a similar effect to the slower deposits idea that is more generally seen by old Earth and evolutionary geologists and paleontologists. And so this is more getting into questions of science and whether or not these things are possible scientifically, and questions as to whether the flood happened. And there's actually a lot of study that a lot of young Earth creationists, there's a lot of professional study that a lot of them have done into these issues. So it's not as if they don't have hypotheses as to how this could have happened, because they indeed do have hypotheses as to how these things could have happened. So, and again, the idea of a destructive global flood, of course, does indeed explain why the rivers that we do see don't in fact match with the geography that is explained in relation to the Garden of Eden, because the Tigris and the Euphrates, they don't come out from the same river as it says in Genesis. So what does that mean? It means that it's a different Tigris and a different Euphrates, or somehow the headwaters must have changed significantly. And what would explain that? A catastrophic flood.
If flood geology were true, we would not expect to see the same 4 pre-flood rivers described in Genesis chapter 2.
And in fact, we don't. How do we know we don't? Because the geography doesn't match up.
It actually gets much worse for young Earth creationists.
Really?
Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf region sits on top of 9,000 meters of sedimentary rock. Under much of that rock are petroleum deposits. Flood geology says that all that oil came from creatures killed in the flood.
Yes.
The problem is that all that oil and rock is now up to 6 miles below sea level. How could that happen?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's because what they believe is that those areas weren't originally at that level. There are a number of different theories. One is the Hydroplate Theory that states that that because the crust, there's a lot of water under the crust. And that's actually where they say that the water for the Great Flood came from. It's the fountains of the deep. It came from underneath the crust. And because of that, a lot of areas on the Earth, when the flood occurred, it was actually caused by a crack in the crust, which caused some areas of the crust to bunch up a little bit, some areas to go down. And because now a lot more water came from underneath the Earth to on top of the Earth, there's actually a lot, the sea level is a lot higher relative to where it would have been before the flood. So, and also how high the land is also shifted around a bit. So to say that they don't have any explanations when they indeed do have hypotheses as to how this could happen, is a bit short-sighted, because these are things that they do think about very actively. And I'm not going to go into this because this video isn't really about the scientific, the natural science aspect so much as it is about the hermeneutics. But I would say that it's not as if they didn't think about this.
Young Earth dogma of flood geology says that all pre-flood sites
and again, the reason they believe in flood geology is because they don't believe in the Omphalos hypothesis, and they derive from the Bible that the Earth is young, which then, when they look scientifically at the natural sciences, with those ideas in mind, what solution do you think they would have for the geologic column? They would have to assume that it was sedimented rapidly. And also, Rich Deem is incorrect in saying that Eden was near the four rivers in the Persian Gulf, because geographically, what we see doesn't match up with what the Bible says about the geography of the rivers. Even if we assume a major ice age that would remove a lot of the ice, it still would not explain that. And in fact, because the four rivers are stated as having their headwaters come out of the river that flows through the Garden of Eden. So they're coming out of the river, they're not going into it.
Mentioned in the Bible were destroyed by the global flood. So we can't know where the Garden of Eden was located.
And the reason we can't is because the geography doesn't match up, which does indeed imply that either we're looking at the wrong place for naming the rivers, or it's not the same river anymore.
However, the Bible clearly says that Eden was located near the four rivers that empty into the Persian Gulf.
And again, it's not the four rivers that empty into the Persian Gulf. That's not what the Bible says. It says the four rivers that come out of a river that flows through the Garden of Eden, which the four rivers that you described do not. They do not come out of the same source. They do not come out of the same underwater spring. They do not come out of a same surface river. So again, you need to more accurately read the geographical description that it gives.
When forced to choose between their dogma and the Bible, young Earth creationists reject the Bible.
Okay, and I'm going to stop here. Next time we're going to go into the flood, which is very interesting. But tell me what you thought. Do you have any questions regarding hermeneutics that are going on here? If you would like to appear on my show, I would be happy to have you. So thank you all. Ooh, did I forget to switch the window capture? Yes, I did. Oops, well, you can watch the video yourself, so it's not a major problem. Most of it is audio-based anyway, so it's not a big problem. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Immortal. Over and out.